A few things that we're just going to go from the beginning, but we're not going to spend much time on the review here. We're just going to get right to where we were last week as we talk about the subject of the nations. I'm going to try to end a little bit early today so that I can go get my waders on. And the very first thing we're going to have in the service this morning is our baptism. My little Amanda's being baptized, and we're going to have that first, and then we'll start the service as usual because we want to end with the Lord's table, and so it just works out best if we can get that started. So I'll probably try to end a little bit early, a little bit of a challenge, but we'll get that done, hopefully. I'm not in the habit of looking at the clock. I'm in the habit of hearing the bell go off, and then I know it's close. But anyway, we look at the subject of the nations, which of course are God's design for people. When we talk about the nations, we're really talking about people. We're talking about all the various ethnic races, all the various people in the world. Chinese people, African people, Indian people, American people, all those little obscure nations all over the face of the earth that nobody even considers or considers very, very little. All of that is included with this idea of the nations. So God has a plan for the nations. And of course, that plan, I believe, culminates on this earth when we talk about during the church age now. Well, we're going to talk about that a little bit later on, but during the church age, the nations don't have quite the significance that they have back in the Old Testament times, or that they will during the millennial time as well. And so God right now is calling people from every tongue, every tribe, every nation out, and of course those are His holy nation, His holy people, all of us together. Now, of course, during the millennial kingdom and all of that, then and to an extent, really also during the Great Tribulation time, God will again be dealing with the nations and judging the nations. And once again, during the millennial kingdom, of course, the apple of His eye will be Israel. He'll rule in Jerusalem. And those nations who will trust Him, adhere to Him, will be a part of that as well. So, and blessed as we're going to see today in Christ. All right, so last time, just very quickly, we noticed that there are two primary words, one being Hebrew, one being Greek. The one is the Hebrew, which is goyi, mostly translated nation, but also heathen, Gentiles, and so on. The Greek word is very similar, Gentiles, nation, ethnos. So we get our word today, ethnic, the ethnic group, very similar word to glory, rather than seeking the glory of God. Yes. Yes, yeah, and probably was. Some think there's still remnants of that tower standing. Of course, in comparison, they were very impressed with that tower. That tower went up to the heavens. That was their assessment. Now, if we looked at that tower compared to, say, the Empire State Building or something like that, we would probably think they thought that went up to the heavens. But they were very impressed with it. Yes?
It was also their response to the flood. They were going to be inundated by the flood.
Yeah, right, yes. Yeah. And so they wanted to get away from God. They wanted to seek their own glory and take their own path. And they thought, of course, if we stick together, we can do this together. And really, since that day, there's always been a desire on the part of sinful men. There's always been a desire for this one world government to come to be. And they will, and every time they've tried it, every time it just does not work out. And the reason for that being is that it is not the proper time. There will eventually, we know from the Bible, they will eventually at least somewhat succeed in uniting the world. But of course, the moment they say peace and safety, what happens? Sudden destruction comes upon them. All right? So they don't get to enjoy their unity for very long before they are once again destroyed. But this has always been in the heart of man, and you can read this. I took some time when I was in college to read about some of the men who have pushed for a one world government and tried to preach that. And from hundreds of years ago, there have been men and groups who have desired this. And I believe that's true to this day. You can call it the New World Order, you can call it whatever you want to, but the idea is, and you know, you can plaster a Bible verse on the United Nations building. Obviously, we know when they beat their swords into plowshares, how's that brought about? It's not going to be brought about by the United Nations and a one world government, but that's their idea. If we could just get rid of these nations, if we could get rid of these divisions, these artificial things that divide us, and you know, then Russia wouldn't be fighting a war against Ukraine, and I mean, because it wouldn't be a Russia and there wouldn't be a Ukraine. We're all one. Nobody has anything to fight about. That's the idea, and that's the dream, if you will, of these folks. But it's a very faulty dream because it doesn't take into consideration the sinful heart of man. Man thinks that he is wonderful, and that if you could just knock some of these artificial, what they would term artificial barriers and things away, and change the environment that man has to deal with, well, you wouldn't have all this war and stuff. But it totally misses the fact that man is hopelessly flawed. And you establish a one world government, and you'll find out how untrue all of that would be. And the Lord knew that. And the Lord said, now nothing will be restrained to them that they desire to do. And in other words, they will go about to establish themselves, and the desire, of course, is to put God out of the picture. And God wouldn't allow it. And the only reason God will allow it in the future is so that he will get the glory and the victory over it. And it will not succeed. It may appear to succeed for a very short time. Their dream will be appearing to come to reality, which, by the way, any of their dreams that they have, they always are very disappointing. There's always a disappointment when man's dreams seem like they're coming to pass. They never fulfill, they never satisfy like they hold out the promise that they will. They never satisfy. I read just recently about, they've got their great dream of homosexual marriage now. And it wasn't 2 days after that thing passed from the Supreme Court that I was reading an article about them saying, well, I think we were better off as an oppressed minority because now we have status, and now we're just going to take it for granted like everybody else takes marriage for granted. And so it's like this thing is not 2 days old, and there's a group of people already not satisfied with what they've got. They've got to have something else, and that's just the way it is with sinful men. Nothing will satisfy. Obviously, if You have a one world leader. What's that one world leader going to do? He's going to be the oppressor. He's going to be the one who takes advantage of the people, who will not allow those who are godly even to exist. And so God, at this very early time, God establishes the nations, and these are the will of God for the time being, and that is because of the sinful heart of man. We see that right here in the book of Genesis, chapter 11. All right, and so, but it's not long after that after God scatters these nations, it's not a whole long time after that God makes the great promise as he calls out one nation. But that one nation is not just one nation. It is one nation that God will use to be a blessing to all nations. And I don't think we can miss that when we understand what God is doing with Israel. The idea behind God choosing Israel was not just so that Israel could be saved. It was so that men everywhere eventually would be saved, that all the nations of the earth would be blessed. And by the way, I believe that is true as we speak of the gospel today, as people are called out of every nation. But I believe it will also be true in the millennial kingdom, when whole nations of people who trust the Lord will be a part of that kingdom. And yes, he will reign from Jerusalem. And you know, those Gentile believers, those Gentile nations will accept the fact that Israel is the important part of God's plan, and that God used them to be a blessing. There will no longer be, at least certainly at the beginning of the millennial kingdom, there will no longer be this hatred of the Jews and those kinds of things. Ultimately, at the end of the millennium, we know that there will be there will be everybody who enters the millennium is better. That is false, but it will be played out and shown to be false in the end of time, because man in his sinfulness will still rebel against God and not be right in the end. So we're going to look at Genesis 17 to start with. Genesis chapter 17, verses 4 through 6. God reiterates his covenant. Now, he's already in Genesis chapter 12 approached Abraham about calling him out, making him a people. But here he says in Genesis chapter 17, verse 4, as for me, behold, my covenant is with thee. And this is, of course, the Lord talking to Abraham. At this time, he's Abram. He's just about to become Abraham. As for me, behold, my covenant is with thee, and thou shalt be a father of many nations. Neither shall thy name any more be called Abram, but thy name shall be Abraham. For a father of many nations have I made thee, and I will make thee exceeding fruitful. And I will make nations of thee, and kings shall come out of thee. Now, if you turn to chapter 22 of Genesis, chapter 22, and verse number 18, he reiterates another thing. If you start in verse 17 here, he says that in blessing I will bless thee, and in multiplying I will multiply. Today, Israel, sadly, looks like anything but a nation that is blessed, using the blessing, having rejected her Messiah, being hated of the nations. Throughout history, mostly, Israel has been despised and hated. Obviously, the devil hates Israel, hates God's people, and I believe those of us who are truly believers will have compassion on the Jews. And we don't hate them. We love them. We want them to be saved like Paul did. Paul had a heart for his countrymen, even though he knew they were rejecting Christ. He said, my heart's desire and prayer to God for Israel is that they might be saved. And we should have that same kind of a heart for the Jewish people. And even though I believe many false professing Christians have a wrong view of the Jews. They see the Jews as the ones who killed Christ, and therefore they hate them. And of course, we understand as true believers that we were just as responsible as anyone for Christ going to the cross, and that there is no opportunity for us to point fingers at somebody else and say, that's what you did. No, that's what we did. That's the way our hearts are this very day. So we need to be aware of that. All right, one more thing I think we'll have time to get to here as we look at the next point here, and that is that as God deals with the nations, throughout history, and God states it right in His Word in some places that we're going to look at here, God raises up and puts down nations according to His will. That is as far as the influence. Let's be honest. Some nations have more influence in the world than others. There are some nations, maybe small nations, that really, on the worldwide scene, they don't get much mention. The only reason Greece gets much mention today is for a negative purpose, because they don't have enough money to pay their bills. But smaller nations that don't have much influence, and then there have always been the nations that God raises up to use for His purposes for a time. And then He will when He's done with that nation, He will put that nation down and raise another nation up. Let's look at a few of the passages here, and then we're going to be done. All right? Genesis chapter 21. Going back just a few chapters here. Genesis chapter 21 and verse number 13. We see God telling Abraham that Ishmael and also of the son of the bondwoman will I make a nation, because he is thy seed. Look how God, look to the extent of how God keeps His promises. He says, He's thy seed. I've given you a promise. He will also be a great nation. And so it was God's choice to do that. In verse number 18, it says, Arise, lift up the lad, and hold him in thine hand, for I will make him a great nation. And so God raised up Ishmael. And we know that throughout history this has been a point of contention. Ishmael and Israel don't get along very well, do they? Throughout history, they have not gotten along very well, and like two fighting brothers, they hate one another. Only the thing is, they're genuine hatred. A lot of times with brothers, they fight, but then they come back together and they really love each other, but they just like to spar. This is a little bit different. This is a genuine hatred, a genuine opposition, one nation to the other. Judges. Oh, well, wait a minute. Chapter 35 of Genesis first. Chapter 35, verse number 11. talking to Jacob now here. It says, and God said unto him, unto Jacob, I am God Almighty, be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall be of thee, and kings shall come out of thy loins. And so God is saying that there obviously will be more than just one nation. He's one chosen people, but many nations will come out of even out of Abraham, more than one nation. Judges chapter 2. We go all the way to the book of Judges. Judges chapter 2. If I can get my Bible over there. Judges chapter 2, verses 20 through 23. It says, and the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel, and he said, because that this people hath transgressed my covenant, which I commanded their fathers, and have not hearkened unto my voice, I also will not henceforth drive out any from before them of the nations which Joshua left when he died, that through them I may prove Israel, whether they will keep the way of the Lord to walk therein, as their fathers did keep it, or not. Therefore the Lord left those nations without driving them out hastily, neither delivered he them into the hand of Joshua. All right, so he left the nations that were really a snare to Israel. Why did he leave them there? To test Israel, to see if they would really put him first, walk with him. So he's using these other nations for his purposes, even here. And he says, the only reason for their existence, the only reason I'm going to leave them here is to test Israel. That was the reason he left them there. And obviously Israel, as far as they were concerned, they would have loved to have those nations done away with, but that was not God's plan because of Israel's disobedience and lack of putting God first. That's really what happened there. Now we need to go back up to Amos and find him. Amos chapter number, I can't read my own writing. Is that 8 or 6? I can't read it. All right, we're gonna find it though. Amos right here, chapters. If I look up here, I'll see it better. 6 and verse 14. It says, but behold, I will raise up against you a nation, O house of Israel, saith the Lord, the God of hosts, and they shall afflict you from the entering of Hamath unto the river of the wilderness. Now God is raising up a nation to do what to Israel? To judge them, to afflict them. All right? And God did that. The last reference here is the book of Job. You have to go all the way back to Job in order to find this one. Job chapter 12. And let's see. This is Job speaking in Job chapter 12 and verse number 23. He's speaking of the Lord. He says, he increaseth the nations and destroyeth them. He enlargeth the nations and straighteneth them again. All right? So in other words, God is the one who takes a nation and lifts it up for his purposes, and he takes the nation and puts it back down. God is the one who uses those nations according to his will. And next time, which will be in about 3 weeks, Lord willing, we will see the rest of that as far as some other things about how God does that, how he raises them up and then puts them down again, and those kinds of things. All right, but we need to go. I need to get going, so let's have a word of prayer.